We've got an hour here, right? So let's see, what is it? Just came, meeting is being recorded. Oh yeah, okay, that's good. I'm going to share my screen to start with, and this will start off kind of light. What I want to cover today, I think, is a little on the heavy side. So I'm going to share some slides here. I don't know if I can see if I can figure out how to do that. Can you see this slide of New Mexico State?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
And I want to congratulate the people of Las Cruces for their school upsetting UConn on the initial round of NCAA. I thought they were going to pull it off again last night after a slow start, but they didn't make it. So anyway, they're to be congratulated for doing that. And like I said, let me share my screen. Let me see. There we go. So this is just a title slide. Today will be an interactive discussion, at the end of which I hope you'll have some ideas about which public policies on climate change would be more effective than others. And I think I was invited to attend Don Neidig's January 30 presentation. I didn't make it, but I did look at his slides, which describe the added heat load to the planet caused by greenhouse gas emissions, and also the human failure to deal with the rapidly closing window to take action in the short term to avoid catastrophic suffering in the long term. And one of Don's slides said this: climate science moved us from innocence to culpability. And I agree with him. Those of us who understand the problem and are not talking about it are responsible for stepping up to do what we can about it. And we need to get outside our comfort zones and forcefully advocate for the policies that make a difference at scale. So today, I hope each of us will come away with some ideas on that, on what we can do to make a difference. You've seen enough, I'm sure, of the horrible pictures that are coming out of Ukraine, so I won't show any more. But it's worth thinking about it a little bit here. This slide here, by the way, is a slide from the artwork from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC's 6th Annual Assessment Report. We're at a crossroads in history. War in Ukraine, with the free world united in opposition, and European reliance on Russian oil and gas still at the center. And I'm sure, like you, I've heard a hard time getting through my day without thinking about the horrors inflicted on the people of Ukraine. And our response, of course, has been to provide arms and other supplies to help Ukraine. And second, sanctions to starve Russian resources needed to fund its war effort. All of that accepts the supply of Russian gas to Europe, the revenue from which provides millions per day to help fund the Russian war effort. War crimes are being committed, but I'd like to shift focus here to an even greater crime. And it was documented in the historical IPCC report issued, believe it or not, just 4 days after the Russians attacked Ukraine. This report was approved by 195 nations of the world and was described by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as follows. I wish it had gotten more news, but here's his quote. "I've seen many scientific reports in my time, but nothing like this. Today's IPCC report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. This report reveals how people on the planet are getting clobbered by climate change. Nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone now. Many ecosystems are already at the point of no return now. Unchecked carbon pollution is forcing the world's most vulnerable on a frog march to destruction now. The facts are undeniable. This abdication of leadership is criminal. The world's biggest polluters are guilty of arson of our only home. It is essential to meet the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. End of quote. The EU had the courage to stop the use of Nord Stream 2 after it had been completed, after an investment of no less than $11 billion. And that's going to become, I'm sure, a stranded asset. But not to let a crisis go to waste, the fossil fuel industry is proposing, and their political followers, that the US and the EU spend billions more in liquid natural gas or LNG infrastructure to replace Russian gas. This, by the way, would take 3 to 6 years to bring them to online, and likely also to become stranded assets, just like Nord Stream 2. Instead, as this LA Times editorial argues, shouldn't we focus instead on energy independence without increased reliance on fossil fuels, clean energy, and improved efficiency? 350.org founder Bill McKibbins has even proposed invoking the Defense Production Act to supply electric heat pumps to the EU to replace gas heating. Our executive director from an organization I spend most of my time with, Citizens Climate Lobby, Madeline Para, says this: for years, our planet has been showing the need to move away from fossil fuels. Extreme weather driven by excess greenhouse gas emissions continues to get more frequent and more expensive to recover from. But today, it's not just the climate pressuring us to get off fossil fuels. Our geopolitical and economic realities are now demanding the same thing. So, where do Americans stand on climate change? And I'm asking each one of us here to think about which category you would fall into. I say which category. We tend to think of people lying in 2 categories about climate change. They either believe in it or they're deniers. But there's a survey done, been doing for several years now by the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication, that divides people into 6 categories. And here's the choices. And I'm not showing them to you yet because I want you to think about which one you might belong in. They are this: doubtful, disengaged, cautious, concerned, or alarmed. So where do you fit? The categories are dismissive or doubtful, disengaged or cautious, concerned or alarmed. You should think about that, and then think about where the population is. So here it is. The dismissive group is, I'm sure, probably smaller than you might have thought. And what I take away from this is that, first of all, I've been watching this for some time. The alarm group is growing, and it's growing dramatically. The alarmed and concerned together show that well over 50% of the populace is either alarmed or concerned about climate change. And if you just look at those that are very worried versus somewhat worried, the very worried group has climbed up from by 24%, from 11% in 2015 to in 2021, another 24% up to 35%. So the number of people that are very worried about climate change is growing dramatically. It's worth thinking, though, or noticing that those that are not worried. Take a look at this. David Steele and I were talking earlier about what the seeming political divide on some issues, depending on which tribe you belong to. But the fact remains that most people, even in Congressional District 2 in New Mexico, are worried or worried about global warming. Fully 2/3 of people in District 2, and this also you can get from the Yale project, a breakdown by state, by county, by congressional district, most any way you want to. I thought you'd like to see this. This shows 2/3 of the people in the district you live in are concerned. Yet, look at this. How many of us are discussing it? This is not different, by the way, from my own congressional district. You know, 2/3 are concerned, but only 1/3 of us are talking about it. And that's why Texas Tech atmospheric scientist and IPCC report author, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who's also the author of Saving Us, says the most important thing that we can do about climate change is not talk about facts, but just talk about what they care about, and then find a relationship to the climate, because there's plenty to talk about there. So there's a gap in emissions. This shows where we are going on this black line between now and the end of the century, and the green line showing where emissions need to go if we're to save a livable future for future generations. And by the way, if you just look at the population in general, Americans, 60% of Americans, it's growing, but it's still not where scientists are. In fact, some scientists are now saying we've done our work. Now it's up to the people and their policymakers to act. So there, I'd like to stop there and then go to what I think will be useful in thinking about what we're doing in, first of all, see if I can't, somehow I managed to get something on here I didn't want. Uh-oh. Anyway, can you see this presentation of this En-ROADS climate simulator? There's two graphs and a policy section at the bottom. Can everybody see that? I hope.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the En-ROADS. En-ROADS, by the way, it's with an E, David. It's Energy, Rapid Overview and Decision Support is what it stands for. It's a global climate simulator built with MIT Sloan and Climate Interactive. It's been publicly available now for a couple of years, and it's quickly being used throughout the world, now in 13 different languages. And I think I can show that to you here. There's the languages it's available in now. It's being used all over the world. There are presently 471 En-ROADS climate ambassadors, and that is up by 200 since I became one a year ago. And they're trying to improve that to 7,000. They'd like to make it, the training program is free, and I hope maybe some of you might think about going through that training. It's all online, easy to do, and it's really educational. John Kerry calls this, by the way, a game changer because it facilitates good discussions and helps people think about different public policy solutions. So let's look at talk about what we're looking at here. On the left side of the graph, you'll see energy sources, primary energy sources, coal and brown, oil and red, blue, natural gas, and green showing renewable energy. On the right is a graph that presently shows gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year being emitted. You can look at where we are right now, for example, in 2022. I can get my finger to get there, about 57 gigatons a year. By the way, scientists tell us we have a carbon budget of about 500 gigatons to get beyond, to get to points where we can't recover from the effects of climate change. You'll always see, no matter which graph we're showing here, the temperature, the growth in average global temperature from the start of the Industrial Revolution through the end of the century, which is the model showing 3.6 degrees or 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's Celsius or Fahrenheit. And by the way, there's a myriad of graphs that you can see here. One of the ones that I like to show the impact is temperature change, for example. The IPCC's goal set and that the worldwide has been agreed to in principle is to keep average global temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius and strive to keep it at 1.5 degrees. You can see what the trend line is. So the object of this climate model is, the simulator, is to look at these policy solutions that are in the bottom half of the graph. The policy solutions on energy supply, on transport, buildings and industry, growth and population and the economy, land use and industry emissions, and carbon removal. So those are the policy sliders that we have to work with. And you can pretty much model most climate solutions on this. You can do this in the basic mode, say, for example, carbon price, and thousands of calculations take place and show in a systems dynamic model what the impact of that is on energy use and on carbon emissions, or keeping the temperature below where it was headed. And you should understand that this is based on the best available climate science on energy, land use, agricultural economics from the EIA, the IEA, the IPCC, and results are compared against the Energy Model Forum. And the simulator is frequently updated, almost monthly, as peer-reviewed studies update the science. And the last one, by the way, showed sea level rise. Let's see, no, it showed, it showed sea level rise. Prior to this month, the sea level rise projections were about 1.3 meters through the end of the century. It's been lowered to about just over 0.7 of a meter through the end of the century. That's based on a middle scenario on the latest IPCC report that was issued at the end of February. So they constantly update that. By the way, when you look at that, I want you to notice, look at the trend line. It's pretty steeply up after the end of the century. We can talk more about that later. You can also look at this in the advanced mode. Instead of looking at a carbon price at, say, where the slider had it at $140 a ton, you can move it up to more, or you can move it down to, say, $66 a ton or $25 a ton. And you can see immediately what the impact is on energy demand, energy sources, on average global temperature, and other things that you can model there. And you can also say when the carbon price starts. You can say how many years it takes you to get to the price that you're set. And there's a lot of other information there. If you're interested in knowing more about what the model is showing on this particular slider, it gives you examples, it gives you messages, key dynamics, talks about where the slider is. And by the way, if you don't like where the sliders are set, you can always go and look at the assumptions and even change the assumptions based on what the assumptions are. But the assumptions are set at what the best available science is showing based on published reports. So I want you to think about public policies that you might be curious about. And we have a few of us on here that I'll just turn it over to you to tell me what you'd like to see. It's interactive.
Okay.
Anybody curious about one of the—
Doug, I have a quick question. What are the metrics on the slide bars that you have there? It's like, take coal, for example. I see you've got it set, the dot set pretty far to the right. But I don't know what the metrics are.
There's lots of ways you can present this. This is I know from the presentation that Don gave you that you all know about exajoules or joules. This is just exajoules, which are joules to the, I think, the 18th power. A quintillion joules is what's shown here, is one exajoule. What's interesting to see about this, I think, is look where we are now in 2022 in terms of, this shows energy demand. It's in exajoules, but energy demand right now, we tend to think that, well, if you've got all of these solar farms and wind farms being built, they must be displacing fossil fuels, right? No, they're not. Look at this. It keeps going up. In fact, we are at an energy demand of 600 exajoules now, but it's projected to double by the end of the century at our current, on our
Right.
current weak action future. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I mean, I'll
Okay,
stop.
well, when you go down to the bottom of the slide, to the bottom half of the slide, and under energy supply, I take it that if we move the dot up and down, that it's going to change the graphs, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's where I was wondering about what the metrics are.
Well, the metrics are different for, in case of carbon price, it's a carbon price at the source at a particular carbon price per ton. New zero carbon would be, this will tell you if you put, this is just a zero carbon breakthrough. It's I'm not sure what the, if it will tell you what the metrics are here. Yes, it's in exajoules, new carbon energy in exajoules. It is the way it is, the metrics there, but it's depending on what the slider is that you're looking at. In the case of coal or oil or natural gas, it's renewables. Let's just look at renewables. It's in tax incentives. This is heavily subsidized taxes and so on. This gives you the exact metric here in cents per kilowatt hour or dollars per kilowatt hour.
Thank you. Well, I'm interested in what impact renewables, renewable policies will.
Okay. All right. Well, one thing I think we can do is just play around, since we're just introducing ourselves to this. I don't want to go into we can go into more detail, but we don't really have time to do too much of that. But it is interesting when you just max out this renewable, highly subsidizing renewables, which we are starting to do now, right? Not as highly as this would show, but look, two things I want you to look at. When you do this, it does displace some of the fossil fuels, but fossil fuels continue to grow throughout the balance of the century. Yes, we get more renewables, but what about energy demand? Does it change? No, it's still going to double even if we highly incentivize renewables. So while that's a good thing to do, it's not a silver bullet. I'll stop.
Hey, I see Elisa Sanchez has her hand up.
Go ahead, Elisa.
Personally, I'm very concerned about the climate. My problem comes when we don't talk about the economy and its effect on people. The fuel industry hires a lot of working class people. What are we going to do with all those people when we know we complain now about, giving people some money for being homeless or whatever? I mean, we have to talk about what kind of jobs are also involved. If we're doing all of these things, are there jobs for people?
Yeah.
And that's a part we never talk about.
Well, that's certainly worthy of a lot of discussion. In fact, you could have a whole session on just where we're headed on employment. But I can say this, the number of people presently working in the fossil fuel industry is smaller than the number of people that are already working in the renewable energy industry. That is growing faster than people are losing jobs in the coal industry, for example. And yes, people are concerned about that because we've got Joe Manchin as a senator in the highest producing coal state. And they obviously have a lot of coal miners who are concerned about it, but they're mostly losing jobs because coal is more costly than renewables and certainly more costly than natural gas. So they're already going to be losing jobs. And yes, we do need to have programs to displace those. Maybe there needs to be some subsidies given to those people. But I'm confident there's going to be more jobs in a clean energy future than there is in a fossil fuel future. And certainly the damage to the climate demands it. I don't know if that helps. Sorry.
Dave Rice, you have your hand up.
Yeah, now, Doug, with all these scenarios, is there a basket of moving the dots which flattens the line, for example, at say the estimated range of 1.6 degrees Celsius. I mean, where you just say, okay, I bend the line down to, so it's in the range out there. It's sort of like the end of the question first.
Yeah, that's something I can do. And we can, what ones do you think, what does your gut tell you might be more effective than something else? I'll tell you this, there is no silver bullet anywhere on this public policy list. But as Catherine Hayhoe says, there's no silver bullet, but there is a lot of silver buckshot.
Okay.
And that's what this kind of represents. We have to do a lot of things to get where we need to be.
So
some things people think, for example, let me just give you an example. In the last administration, you heard it heavily heralded that, hey, what we're going to do to solve climate change is plant a billion trees. Well, let's look at afforestation. You max out that slider, which, by the way, would be more trees than you probably have room to plant. But look what it does to average global temperature over time. It's something we should do, plant more trees. It's something that is, for a lot of reasons, it's a good thing to do and we should do, but it is not going to get us anywhere close to where we need to be. In fact, if you look at afforestation and you just look at, let me see, look up at land use, and I can look at land for farming, growing CO2 removal and biomass. This will show the amount of biomass that's being produced. A couple of things to notice about this is you plant a lot of trees in 2022, assuming you did it all now, it would take years for that to start to build and start absorbing the kind of CO2 you'd like to see it absorb. So it takes a long time. And this dotted line here, just so you know, represents the land area of India. So probably more land area than, I mean, that's maxing out all the available land area on Earth to plant trees on is what this represents. So good thing to do, but does it really, is it as effective as some politicians would like you to make you believe? No, it's not. So what other areas, I'm sure I cut you off, David, what were you thinking might be other more effective areas?
Well, for example, if I, until now, I was thinking that, for example, coal is a soft target in the sense that there's obvious labor issues, but we've been cutting back on coal for a while. But also there's a little thing there about electrification, for example, under transport. And we've been talking about shifting our fleet to electrical cars.
Yep.
So those are two things I would suggest.
Well, let's talk about coal. And you hit on something that actually I'm going to go into. Coal, this is really taxing coal. And you can see as we move this slider to more heavily taxing coal, it does reduce the amount in the brown area. That's the coal. It moves it way down. Guess what? It doesn't eliminate it. One thing we could do, and I think there ought to be international efforts to do this, is to actually say, we're going to stop building new coal infrastructure. We're just going to use what we got and take it out. Let's say in 3 years, we banned new coal infrastructure. Look what that does. It snuffs out coal eventually as these plants are retired. And that would make a huge difference in terms of the use of coal. And by the way, coal is, just as another thing we're showing here on impacts, one of the things that I'm sure David Steele is highly knowledgeable about is air pollution from energy. And PM 2.5 micron emissions from coal plants are highly injurious in terms of lung disease, heart disease, and even strokes, as I understand it. And if you look at air pollution from the source, you see coal here represented in the brown area is where most of that comes from. It also comes from bioenergy and oil. So that also shows a dramatic reduction in clean energy really means cleaner, better health for everyone in the world. So that's coal. If you just stopped coal infrastructure, that would be big. It still doesn't get us anywhere close to where we need to get in terms of bending the temperature. But you were talking what was it you were-
Transport, electric, yeah.
electrification. All right, we highly incentivize electrification of cars. I drive an electric car for a lot of reasons. I love doing it because it's a better car. But guess what? You did that on top of everything else. You're making a 2/10 improvement, but it's still not enough. Guess what would make a bigger improvement? It's just energy efficiency overall, and that's electrification. And it also would include trucks and so on. You can find out more about what this means in terms of energy efficiency. Examples would be increasing in walking, biking, using public transports, not just EVs, just less driving totally. Corporate policies on increasing parking spaces, public transit, and so on. Research and development into high efficiency technologies for shipping, vehicles, and air travel. Keep in mind, air travel and sea travel, which most of our goods are transported by, are really tough nuts to crack in terms of electrification, or just if we could be more efficient, that would make a huge difference. So that's somewhat of an improvement. But I'll tell you what, you hit on something else that I'll show you.
Can I interrupt for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Sorry, Doug. Dave Rice, I hope you remember what Doug just said about energy efficiency when we have the discussion about whether to continue our social justice committee meetings via Zoom from our homes or church in person. So just remember
Well
that.
said. Well said. Well said. Yeah, half the people go. I mean, Catherine Hayhoe talks about that. She does a lot of speaking throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. In fact, she accumulates those. She buys carbon credits for the travel she does do, but she likes to have at least 3 or more talks to any location she goes to, and she does most of it by Zoom. And by the way, the energy efficiency, look what it did. It lowered from 1,200 exajoules in terms of energy demand. It lowered it quite a bit. So that actually makes a huge difference. But even a bigger difference is look at what happens when you look at buildings and industry. This is both residential and industry. Now you're talking about a huge difference. You're actually lowering the energy demand from what it is now to the end of the century by building efficiency, energy efficiency. The cheapest energy source is the energy source you don't have to build. That's what's called demand side management in utility speak. And you can do anything you can do to lower the demand for needed energy generating plants. That's money that doesn't have to be spent that way. So energy efficiency, and what are we talking about there? Let's look at what they tell us in the information section there. Examples of this are insulating buildings, purchasing energy efficient technologies. That's motors, lighting, appliances, servers, HVAC systems, conserving energy. Energy experts tell us we should electrify everything. And that includes in your home. That is no gas furnace, do it all by heat pumps, and modern heat pumps, even in cold climates, work. No gas stoves, you use an electric induction stove. It's even better than gas. There are people that I'm friends with who are just changing everything out in their homes to make it all electric. And that's not just your homes, electrify everything. That is, if you can, in industry, the toughest ones in industry, by the way, are cement and steel making. Those are energy intensive. They require high heat to manufacture, and there's a lot of work going into ways to do that without using fossil fuels. Some of this would be it really ties into producing green hydrogen, but also government policies on tax breaks, performance standards, building codes would be huge. I mean, I talked to local legislators in Georgia here. about things that they can be doing on energy efficiency just by improving building codes. The extent you can provide tax incentives for electrifying homes instead of using gas. There are places in the country, in California, that are actually banning gas hookups to homes so that they have to be fully electric. So energy efficiency is big. Electrifying it helps too. So now with these policies, they're making a difference, aren't they? But we're still way below where we need to go. Any thoughts on where people would like to see additional efforts go?
Carol Winkler, do you have your hand up?
No, I did before we started.
Okay, could you?
Well, go ahead, Carol. You have any thoughts about what you'd like to see that we haven't toyed with yet?
No, I'm not that smart.
Well, you don't get the computer model is what's the simulator's the smart thing. We just playing around with what ideas, right?
Okay.
What
John
about-
Seeley has his hand up. John Seeley has his hand up.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you, David. Just like yourself, I was a member, before I moved out here, an active member of CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, and went to Washington a couple of times to lobby. And
Good for
as
you.
I recall, their motto, so to speak, was carbon fee and dividend. And I'm wondering if there's any way you can manipulate your tool there to see what impact a carbon fee and dividend would have, or just a carbon fee.
Yes, you put your finger on what this model, and I'll just let you in on a secret. The most effective public policy, bar none, is carbon pricing.
Right.
And it's not a silver bullet, but just using in the basic mode to put a very high carbon price on, look what that does. It reduces demand by a little bit, but what it really does is it provides incentives, it makes what you don't want, fossil fuels, more expensive, and it makes renewables take the place of those. Even with that, you still haven't reached below 2 degrees.
True.
And you'll see a continued use of fossil fuels throughout the balance of the century. Oil, in this case, because we've stopped the building of coal, we still see natural gas and oil being used. And experts like Ernie, what was his Secretary of Energy? Oneill, I guess is the way you pronounce his name. He used to be a professor at MIT, still does work in energy efficiency, was Secretary of Energy, really a bright guy. He says, we're just going to have to resign ourselves to there's going to be some continued use of oil and gas throughout into the future. But what we need to do is actually get to negative emissions through carbon credits. And that gets to carbon removal technologies. We talked about afforestation, but we can do technological, maybe direct carbon removal or other things. But on carbon price, the question John asked was about putting a specific carbon price on. This is at 232. You will recall, John, that what the legislation that we've had pending for 2 years now by Citizens Climate Lobby, bipartisan, staunchly bipartisan group.
That's one of the reasons I liked it, because it was bipartisan.
Yes, exactly right. Not only that, it's extremely well organized. They have the policy is just irrefutable in terms of how effective it would be. And there are conservative groups like the Climate Leadership Council that have been proposing this as well. This is very conservative Republicans that have been proposing this. Unfortunately, we haven't got elected officials yet to sign on to it to the degree we'd like to. But what you would do is you would start a carbon price, you would start phasing it in. Let's say you phase it in 2022, you'd achieve an initial carbon price, say over the next 30 years, maybe the 28 years, so you get to 2050. You'd want a final carbon price maybe of, I don't know, 300, or if I go that high. And you're to start achieving it. Final carbon price, we'd like to do it by 2050. So you can see what this is doing in terms of carbon price. That gives you a rough idea, and that reduces temperature a little more. One of the things I want to show you and John, you'll be familiar with this since you know about Citizens Climate Lobby, is think about what the cost of the financial impacts of this would be. We assume that, let's see, that's not the graph I want. Let's see, cost. Yes, the financial, it's cost of energy. Here we go. We assume that if you impose the price on carbon, let's just say what CCL proposes is $15 a metric ton on year one, growing $10 a year after that. So it's a gradual climb. It's predictable. People can anticipate it. Industry can anticipate it. We can think about what it does to energy costs. But if you assume that the cost will be passed on to consumers, consumers are going to see an increase in energy prices. What Citizens Climate Lobby is proposing is something that Canada has already done largely through CCL's efforts, and that is to have a carbon dividend. That is, all of the revenue that's created, it's in the billions, would be returned to households in monthly checks, so that 2/3 of the population would actually get back as much or more in their monthly checks as their increase in energy costs.
Well, that's
And
why,
yeah.
that's
So-
why I thought that it made good sense to have that CCL
Right.
policy, both because it was nonpartisan and because it wasn't just one factor. It was carbon pricing and a dividend.
Right.
And
Right.
also, you know, my work as a social scientist for years, when I was still working, made me understand that things are multi-causal, and it isn't just one silver bullet, as Cahill says. It's a bunch of things that probably will do at the same time. In fact, I heard a presentation by a climate scientist at the University of Michigan not too long ago, and she said that the three things that are happening is we're going to mitigate the problem, we're going to adapt to the problem, and we're going to suffer. And I think all three of those things are true. And I think, as I think about it a little bit, I think all three of those things are happening across the world right now. We're mitigating, we're adapting, and we're suffering.
Yeah. So how do we suffer less?
Right, that's the question.
Yeah,
How do
we
we
only
suffer
got-
less?
We've only got 10 minutes left, but I would like to show you another one that is highly effective that we haven't talked about yet. It's methane and nitrous oxide and the fluorinated gases are also potent greenhouse gases. If you take action to reduce those, now you're talking about significant progress. You can get below now with all the things we've done already, where we've bent the curve below 2 degrees. So, and what does that mean? Methane, let's look at what it talks about. What are examples of that? First thing on here is decreased meat consumption. The beef industry, those of you who've studied this know that the beef industry is one of the major producers of greenhouse gases. It's cow burps and farts, but it's also just the way we do agriculture. Agricultural policies like can make a big difference. Decreased methane leakage from oil and gas industries. There are people who say that fracking actually, while it produces natural gas, which has half the greenhouse gas, half the CO2 emissions as an equivalent amount of energy from coal, when you consider the methane leakage, it's just as bad as coal. So we've got to stop methane leakage from fracking and other gas mechanisms, transport. Also increased capturing of gases from landfills and R&D on substitutions for fluorinated gases that we use in refrigeration, for example. So those are things that can be done in methane reduction. And that starts to make a huge difference. Another thing we haven't talked about, and that is technological. And technological includes, you've probably heard some about direct air capture, for example. That's one. That's mechanical, largely mechanical. But if you look at what the other things that are examples of that is land use. For example, silvopasture, having no-till or low-till farming. There's a lot of things that can be done in agriculture that make a difference. In fact, there's a recent Scientific American article about basalt, spreading basalt across the farmed areas that will actually be a huge absorber of carbon dioxide, and also, you know, it'll sequester carbon. So those are things we can be doing. Those are all things that can be done. As you can see, I hope from this that we can get there, but it's going to take silver buckshot, as Katharine Hayhoe would say. I'd like to go back and share a couple of slides, a couple of additional slides. See if I can find a way to do that. I got too much in front of me here to actually present these slides. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can play that. This letter, I want you to be aware, 89 members of Congress. Somehow I've managed to cover this up, and I don't know how to get rid of this. Maybe I can move it down here. Just less than a week ago, 2 members of Congress from New Mexico, along with 87 other members of Congress, signed this letter to the president. And it says, among other things, leading the world in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will require a monumental effort, and the climate components of Build Back Better are an indispensable foundation. And it cited Biden's State of the Union address, urging Congress to move forward with these climate provisions that would mark the largest climate investment in our nation's history, setting the United States on a course to meet our 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction targets by 2030. So Congresswomen in the 1st and 3rd district signed it, not the Congresswoman in your district. You might want to ask Yvette Harrell where she stands on climate change. I've looked at her her platform, and it doesn't say anything about climate. At least she ought to be willing to talk about it. And it seems to me that as constituents, you could push her to do that. Here's a way to communicate what we're at Citizens Climate Lobby now arguing that people should do, and you can, there's a quick way to do it. You probably already know how to contact your senators and the White House, but if you want a quick shortcut, you can use CCL, which stands for Citizens Climate Lobby. cclusa.org/action would take you right to where you can send emails from there. And the 3 messages that we encourage people to give are: the reconciliation package presently being negotiated in the Senate must have strong climate provisions. And since it's in the Senate, that's why we want senators to be contacted. The second message is we need to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030, as the president has committed. And third, we must include a carbon price. I hope you can see that from the model that we showed. We won't get there without that. Finally, if you're interested in any further suggestions, if you want a great book, it's actually by a science writer, science fiction writer, Kim Stanley Robinson, a great science fiction writer, but the book is Ministry for the Future, which has been said by some that if there's one book you ought to read this year, it's this one, because it talks about what we're likely to be seeing over the next 30 years. There's a great film by David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet. He finished that at age 93. It's a wonderful tour of what's going on in the world, not just the human effects, but on biodiversity, which he's an expert on, and he also talks about solutions. I've talked about Katharine Hayhoe. If you just Google Hayhoe, you'll come up with an 8-minute Jimmy Kimmel interview that he does with her, which is really good, or a 17-minute TED Talk she does, talking about how you talk about what's important to be doing on climate change. I'll emphasize that the En-ROADS training is free. Introduce it to conservative groups if you can. I'm happy to do it, or you can do it. And let elected representatives at all levels know how you feel. And as Katharine Hayhoe says, we need to talk about it. Anything else? Any other questions? Have we finished?
Welch has got his hand up.
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a question I have, the one thing that seems open-ended there is the technological solutions. Is there any known physical limit to what can be done if we can figure out the right technology?
Well, I'm encouraged by the amount of works going on there. I listen every day to a host of, there's amazing to me how many podcasts are being done now that on climate by climate experts, everything from financial experts to people that are working on direct carbon technology or virtually things that you haven't even thought about that is going on. It's amazing. The work that's going on. It's the growth in work that's going on in that area is exponential. The commitments being made by major corporations is amazing. So I'm encouraged by the fact that there is direct carbon removal is very tough because you're talking about very small amounts of carbon dioxide in the air that can be brought in and sequestered through direct carbon removal. But farming practices can probably have even a bigger effect. But there's a lot of other ideas in that area, including spreading this article I was referring you to out of Scientific American. If you can see this, it's talking about area in Oman, but there's other areas in California and around the world that have these exposures of these rocks from the mantle of the earth that are very good at sequestering carbon by carbon dioxide captured in rainwater, sifting through the rock, and it actually converts it to calcium carbonate. And if that can be multiplied and you can take that rock and grind it up and spread it on farm fields, that actually can be a huge carbon absorber. So there's a lot of ideas. I've just scratched the surface here.
Okay, we have maybe time for one more question or comment before we wrap up. Is there anybody? Okay, seeing none. Well, first of all, a huge round of applause. And by extension to Dave Rice, who made the excellent suggestion that we invite Doug to, to speak with us today. And I have a sneaking hunch, Doug, that now that we know where you live, you can run, but you can't hide, and that we may be, inviting you back again at some point in the future. So I want to thank you all for being here, and just remind you that next week during our roundtable time, we will be having a special meeting of the Social Justice Committee that the entire congregation is invited to vote for our 4 nominees, to vote from our 5 nominees for 4 of them for our Change for Change program for the next 4 quarters. So we'd like to have a good turnout for that. And with that, I will say again, thank you to Doug, and say goodbye to all of you. So,
And I'll say thank you to my fellow UU congregationists. That I'm glad for your interest, and I'm happy to be available to answer any further questions.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
thanks.
Doug, is there any way you could go back to the slide about contacting the legislature? I couldn't write fast enough to say what all to ask for. It was just a couple slides back.
Well,
The CCL, USA.
I agree with that. I want to see that.
you got it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
If you got an iPhone, you could just, or a smartphone, just take a picture of the screen. Then you got the messages too.
Will
Okay,
this
hold on till I find it.
presentation be available online?
Yeah, we've recorded this presentation, so people can review it at their leisure. And
Is the
Okay, got it.
PowerPoint
Thank you so
available?
much.
what was that, James?
Is the PowerPoint available?
I've got it on Keynote, but I could make it available. I've got a lot of other slides I could put with it, but
I'm
I could
sorry.
make it.
Okay,
Okay.
Doug, if you'd be willing to send that to me, and I'll make sure that the people who would like to have a copy get a copy. So, and for the rest of you, send me an email if you'd like to have a copy of Doug's slides. And as he said, that the application that he was showing us today is available. You can go to Google En-ROADS, and you can go right to it. Takes you right to the site where the application resides. So
I'll tell you, I got as good an education about the overview on what's effective and what isn't on dealing with climate change through the En-ROADS model as anything I've ever done. So I highly recommend it.
James, Rich
Bryce?
would be interested in that.
Yeah, Dave.
Is there any analysis that looks at the what ifs of if we, like in the big climate studies, if we do not reduce the temperature below this, what's the cost that's comparable? I mean, like we've talked about, I've heard the Navy talk about sea level rise and the effect about losing military bases. And you look at what happens if Miami disappears under the waves, kind of a thing. Or lose agricultural productivity because of too much temperature.
Well, we're after the time, but I'm happy to stay on. But let me just say to that a couple of things. We don't have a number, and I don't even think the model goes into it. I can see if it does, but we know this for sure. It's going to cost us a hell of a lot more to do nothing than it is to do something.
Yeah.
Taking these actions is far cheaper than to mitigate the consequences through the actions that we talked about, these public policies. That's a mitigation strategies. And by the way, the next IPCC report coming out on April 4th is going to talk about mitigation practices. And that is going to be far cheaper than the adaptation we're going to be dealing with inadequately at best over time. So we know that it's a no-brainer which way to go. You don't have to have a number, I don't think, to know that. I can share the screen one more time and show you something that might be interesting to you. If I can, excuse me. Here we go. So this one here, let me show you sea level rise. So I told you, even if you manage to keep average global temperature, as we did through all of the actions we talked about, below 2 degrees, guess what? Sea level is going to not go as fast, but what's the trend line? After 2100. Yeah, our children of today, being born today, probably won't see it, but their children and their grandchildren certainly will. If we have any concern at all or any sense of duty to future generations, we ought to think about what's happening to sea level rise beyond 2100. Let me show you. And this model shows that too. It has a flood risk map. This actually is connecting now to Climate Central and showing you maps of the world. This happens to be Alexandria, but we can show other areas. And the blue area, by the way, is the land at risk. And this green area is the land we saved by keeping average global temperature to 1.6 degrees. You can see we didn't save a lot. And you want to see, well, let me show you an area that maybe you're more familiar with. What would you like to see? Florida or Bay Area? Maybe the Bay Area is closer to you.
Florida.
You want to see Florida? Okay, we'll show you Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that Ron DeSantis can't swim.
Pick a red state.
Well, let's look at Florida. Let's look at the detailed map here at Florida down here. Let me get down to the Everglades.
Will the water make the state turn blue?
We could help.
Well, yes. But look what happens to the Everglades here.
Oh, yeah.
The blue area is the area that's still at risk. The green areas are the areas we saved by keeping growth of bringing the average global temperature growth from 3.6 to 1.6. Still, most of it is going to be lost. But let me show you something even worse. I talked about what happens beyond 2100. There's a map they have that's called long-term equilibrium. And the reason what that is, we know that
Oh, my God.
we know that the ocean absorbs heat slower than the atmosphere because of the specific heat of water versus air. It takes actually centuries for this to happen, but over the next 200 to 1,000 years, this is what Florida is going to look like. The blue area being what it would look like, what would be at risk if we were successful, which is a big if, in keeping average global temperature to 1.6 degrees. If we're not, look at the green area, and that's what would be at risk. In fact, let me just reset this thing. Let me reset it. Go back to the map. I'm sorry, I lost that. I hit the wrong button. See.
One more.
Anyway, that take me a second to get back to it, but that will show the area at where on the course we're on right now. That's what Florida would look like.
Wow.
Can
And
we
that-
go to California?
Yeah. California, not too much because it's a pretty steep coastline, but I'll tell you what is going to be affected dramatically, and that is the Sacramento area. I mean, the Bay Area, all the way to Sacramento. Now this, again, this is at equilibrium. This is going out well beyond the end of the end of the century. So anyway, there's just a wealth of information that's available on this this simulator. Again, it's updated almost monthly. It's the best available science we have. We know that no model is going to be accurate to 2100, let alone 2300. But based on the best available information we have right now, this is the best we can estimate. It could be worse, could be better.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes. Thank you again, Doug. You can see we don't want to let you go. So everybody, I'm gonna be logging us off here now. So we'll get Doug back to talk to us again. So thanks a lot, everybody. Bye.
Okay.
You're welcome. Peace.
Peace.